life sentences. What's the case that haunts you? This is 2017. What's the case that haunts you? What's the case that keeps you up at night? And Jim said, well, that's easy. Ben Spencer's case. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Ben Spencer. And the reason is that Jim had gotten all of these people out of prison through his organization called Centurion Ministries. And he had actually taken Ben's case in 2000, found enough evidence to convince a judge that Ben was actually innocent 20 years after the crime. The judge found him innocent, and yet Ben was not allowed to leave prison. Ben was in prison for life because the high court in Texas said that, there's no DNA in this case, so we're not going to let you out. We disagree with the judge. That was in 2011. I called in 2017. I called Jim. He told me about this, and I thought, wow, what this case says is that innocence isn't good enough, right? That even if a judge declares you innocent, that's not good enough. I mean, what good is truth? And so I pitched the story to The Atlantic and to NPR and ended up writing a story, and away we went.
So tell us more about Ben. Who was he and what happened to him?
Okay. And I'm going to let Ben tell a little bit of his own story, but just to briefly tell you, Ben was 22 years old in 1987. On March 22nd, 1987 was the night that Jeffrey Young was killed. He was accosted at the warehouse district. It was a Sunday night. Accosted at his office, dumped in his, two men probably, accosted him, waited outside for him to come outside at night on a Sunday night, hit him, cracked his skull in 5 places, put him in the trunk of his BMW, Jeffrey Young's BMW, drove over the river in Dallas, over Trinity River, went left into West Dallas, which was a really scary, dangerous part of Dallas, which was riven with the crack cocaine epidemic. And essentially, the victim somehow got out of the car, fell on the street. The people panicked, the perpetrators panicked, drove the car into an alley, ran away. The victim died at 3:05 in the morning. And the only evidence that the police had to arrest someone were 3 eyewitnesses who had an incentive, and I'll tell you about that later. But 3 people said that they saw Ben running away from the car, the BMW, that night. Ben Spencer was 22 years old, recently married to the love of his life, Deborah. She was 22 as well. He was working. He was looking for a second job. She had a job. They wanted to buy a house in a different neighborhood to be safer. She was 7 months pregnant, and then they had their life ahead of them. 4 days after the murder, the police arrived at Ben Spencer's house, March 26, 1987, arrested him, and Ben didn't see freedom for another 34 years.
So sadly, there are a lot of wrongful conviction stories. So what drew you to this particular one?
Yeah, Ben's story there were 2 things that drew me to Ben's story. One was that his story is really typical. Okay, we know of at least 3,600 people who've been wrongly convicted and proven innocent since 1989. So his case is really common. And there are certain commonalities about this that I wanted to talk about. Ben's case his story became the narrative spine for a larger story about the criminal justice system and how it's broken. There were incentivized witnesses who wanted a reward. There was a jailhouse informant who wanted a shorter sentence. There were police who were so eager to solve this crime that they ignored a more viable suspect. There was a prosecutor who hid evidence that could have cast doubt on the prosecution of Ben Spencer. So there were these things are so common. They're common in, tunnel vision, where you get your eye on one person, the police and prosecutors, and nothing will distract you from that one person, even a more viable suspect. This is so common. It's true in every single wrongful conviction. So what I really liked about this case is it told a larger story. The other thing is that it told about this one concept, this one idea, which is that it is really easy to convict an innocent person, and it is almost impossible to get that person out. It's almost impossible to undo the mistake. And I wanted to tell those two stories.
Okay, so then Ben's going to prison for life, but he doesn't give up. What options did he have?
So Ben, in the first place, became a jailhouse lawyer, which is what a lot of innocent people become. He spent a lot of time in the law library, met a lot of other people, several other people in the law library who also were later exonerated. That's who tends to go to the law library, is people who are innocent. But he also, I want to tell you about this before Ben comes on, he also reached out to Jim McCluskey. Now Jim, of course, was the one who told me about the story, the father of the modern innocence movement. Jim McCluskey, Ben wrote Jim at Centurion Ministries in 1989, long before, 4 years before the Innocence Project was even thought of. He wrote him a letter. Centurion Ministries was getting thousands of letters a year. And they had basically 2 staff and a bunch of volunteers, so they couldn't take all of these cases. But he just kept writing. He kept writing, and they kept writing back. If I can, let me just tell you one thing about Jim McCluskey, because this is a faith community, and this is like what faith does. Jim's faith, what it did. What Jim's faith did is it upended the criminal justice system. Jim was a seminarian at Princeton Theological Seminary in 1980. And as part of his practicum, his second year, fall semester, he served as a volunteer chaplain at Trenton State Prison. And while he was there, he made friends with lots of the guys, but there was this one guy named Chiefy, nicknamed Chiefy. And Chiefy just had this bee in his bonnet about how he's innocent. And Jim's like, yeah, right. This is 1980. As if anyone who's in prison is innocent. That's ridiculous. And Chiefy kept saying week after week, Jim, I may be a heroin addict, but I'm not a murderer. I'm innocent of this crime. And Jim's like, yeah. And finally, Thanksgiving comes along, and Chiefy says, Jim, will you just read my trial transcript over Thanksgiving break and tell me what you think? And so Jim did, and he came back and the next week, and Chiefy said, so what do you think? And Jim said, well, I think you may be innocent. And Chiefy goes, well, what are you going to do about it? And Jim goes, what do you mean, what am I going to do about it? I'm a seminarian, for Pete's sake. And Chiefy said, well, you can't just go back to your little dorm room and pray for me. God uses humans, and you're the only human I have. So Jim took a year off from January to January, reinvestigated. He'd never done any of this. Going to the scariest parts of Trenton, it was craziness with this little, he didn't have a collar at that point. Later he used his collar. But he'd go in, he'd talk to witnesses, he'd talk to the police, he'd talk to, everyone. And he found enough evidence to show that the 2 witnesses, the jailhouse snitch and the star witness, both lied, and the police and prosecutors knew about it. And he found a pro bono lawyer. He got the case before a federal judge, and the judge ruled that Chiefy was innocent. And Chiefy walked out of prison. And when Jim, who right about the time Chiefy walked out of prison, Jim was graduating from Princeton Theological Seminary. And what he realized is that his call was not to the pulpit, his call was to the wrongly convicted. So he started Centurion Ministries with a $10,000 gift from his parents, and it's named after the centurion who is sitting under the cross as Jesus is being crucified, and he looks up and he says, surely that one was innocent. So that's Centurion Ministries, and that's who Ben was writing. And faith is a major theme, not only Jim's, but also Ben Spencer's and other people's as well. So that's That's what he did.
So for Ben, what could he do? Because the case had already been litigated and appeals. Like what could be done for Ben?
So what Jim did, which he had at this point a lot of experience with Texas. He had gotten 3 people off death row in Texas. And what Jim did is he just came down and he started investigating. He and another person who is a former journalist, they just began investigating, talking to witnesses, talking to witnesses who hadn't testified, talking to witnesses who had testified for the state, talking to Ben's alibi witness, and they found also evidence that there was a more viable suspect. 2 people had gone to the police before the trial and told the police about this more viable suspect, that this person had confessed to them, and the police ignored it because they had their guy, tunnel vision. And so Jim started gathering all this evidence, and he brought it before a judge, and they were off and running. I'm just wondering, are we?
12:04.
I'm wondering if Ben is up.
Oh, he is.
Hello.
Yay!
Excellent.
Hey, Ben.
How's everybody doing?
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
This is really a privilege. So Barb was just telling us about your wrongful conviction and that you're sentenced to life in prison after the second trial. Could you please describe what that was like for you?
It was traumatic for sure. From being free, working and married, first child expecting, and then to be in find yourself in a jail cell accused of a crime that you didn't commit, kind of tough.
Ben, can you tell us about that night after you? Actually,
I think
can you? You were actually your lawyer found out after the first trial when they had already convicted you, the jury, but they were deliberating on your sentence. He found that the star witness had lied and the police knew about it, and the prosecutor knew about it because she had received a reward for her testimony. And they offered you a deal, right? They could either charge you again, they could try you again a second time, because that case was dismissed,
right.
Or you could go to trial. Can you just talk?
Okay, for some reason the audio is going in and out. So can you hear me? Okay. So what happened was, after the first trial, and I was sentenced in the first trial, convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years non-aggravated, which means under that sentencing, I could have done, once my good time and flat time equaled up to 35 years, which probably would have been like 5 to 6 years, I would have been eligible for parole. As Barb mentioned, that conviction was thrown out when it was found that this lady, Gladys Olive, had lied about knowing about a reward that she had called Crime Stoppers, as opposed to this investigator who she claimed she had called. And in addition to that, it was found that I was employed at the time that the offense happened and not terminated as had been testified to by Sue from the personnel department where I worked. So I was granted a new trial, and the Friday before the second trial was to begin, I was told by my attorney that the state had called him up and asked him if I would be interested in taking a plea offer. And so he came to me and presented the plea offer, which was they were willing to give me a 20-year non-aggravated sentence, which means I could have did like 2 years and been eligible for parole. And I told him at that time I didn't commit any crimes, so I wouldn't take a day for a crime that I didn't commit. So no, I wouldn't accept a plea bargain.
And he kind of pushed you to accept it. I mean, right? Like, he thought this was your only chance, and he told you that you would get life if you
Yeah.
didn't accept the
Yeah.
plea bargain.
Yeah. So what he suggested was that after I told him I wouldn't take any time for something I didn't do, he suggested I talk to my wife and my mother, because he was of the opinion that the state, if I was to get convicted, the state would be asking for a life sentence, and I was likely to get a life sentence. And I was like, well, whatever they're going to do, they're going to have to do it to me, because I'm not going to accept any time for something I didn't do. But I took his suggestion, as he asked me to present it to my mother and my wife that night. And when I went home, when I called home that night, I talked to both my wife and my mother. And I was telling them what suggested. And at that time, he told me that, well, I told them what he said, and both my mother and my wife suggested to me that I take time, that they knew that I was innocent, but they just wanted me to come home, and they thought that this was a quicker way to get me home as opposed to me being incarcerated. So I again explained to them that I couldn't accept any time for something I did not do, because I didn't commit the offense. So why should I take any time for it? And it was like, we understand that. We just want you to come home. And so I began to explain to them the ramifications of me accepting a plea bargain. I said, you just don't accept a plea bargain. You have to actually write out a affidavit stating that you committed this crime, and you have to give details of the crime that you claim that you committed. I said, so that's the one thing I can't do. I can't lie and say I did something I didn't do. And the second thing is, if I accept this time for something I didn't do, who's to say that this won't happen again? I make parole, and investigators can't find a viable suspect. So, hey, we know that Ben accepted a plea bargain the last time for a crime he didn't commit. Let's go pick him up again and send him back to prison for something he didn't do. So I didn't want to put myself in that type of predicament. So again, I refused, and respectfully told both my mother and my wife that I couldn't take time for something I didn't do, and they told me that they understood that and that I needed to do what was right. So that's what we did. Yeah, for some
Yeah,
reason.
so there was a moment, Barb talks about it in the book, when you decided to surrender this all to God. Can you describe that moment?
Yeah, the one when you were in jail after you'd been in solitary.
Yeah. Well, to begin with, after my arrest, not understanding why this was happening to me, most people, of all people, why is this happening to me? And I grew up going to church, and for some reason, there's this uh, thought kept occurring in my conscience, which was, as a child, I used to always say I want to grow up and be a preacher, among one of the things I wanted to do. And so it was like I kept hearing this. You said when you grew up, you was going to be a preacher. And so I requested a Bible, started reading the Bible. Wasn't getting much from the Bible other than increasing my headache and seemingly a lot of words off a page. But I began to pray about that because I knew that there was something there. And so I prayed and I asked God to open my understanding, to enlighten me in His Word. And the more I prayed the prayer, the more I began in the Bible that I didn't understand before. Of course, I had heard, been ministered to as a child, but it didn't begin to resonate with me until I began to study the Word of God for myself. So eventually, I got me and another guy. We kind of had a little confrontation, and I wound up in solitary because uh, they thought I was, uh, I guess, running everybody on the tank, which was the other way around. I wouldn't let anybody hog me. So I wound up in solitary, which was supposedly been just for 7 days, which led up to be something like 45 to 60 days. Although I wasn't getting any trouble, I think they just kind of forgot about me. But it was a good time for me because it allowed me to have clear thoughts, because I was by myself pretty much. And I was able to focus more on what I was doing and began to question things I was doing, as a 22-year-old adult. I was wondering, why was I having these physical altercations and verbal altercations with guys when I'm grown.
When I'm grown, I didn't have anything to anybody.
So
So
I guess I got to know myself better.
I guess I got to know myself better in solitary.
And so a lot of good came out of me being in solitary. In fact, while I was in solitary, that's when my first trial began, while I was in solitary. And it wasn't until after I had been convicted and sentenced that they let me out of solitary.
Yeah.
So what was the hardest for you, Ben, losing Deborah? And why did you insist that she divorce you?
Well, after going to prison, you kind of hold on to the idea that the truth will prevail. In fact, I always thought that the truth would prevail before I was ever convicted, uh, which is one of the reasons why I went to the second trial, because I thought that, this is my opportunity again to present the truth, and perhaps this time a jury will believe the truth, and I'll go home. But after being convicted and sentenced the second time, and also sentenced to life, I had to do 20 years flat before I could even think about making parole. And I just thought it was unfair for Deborah to be tied into a relationship that I couldn't be much of a husband nor a provider. Uh, so I just thought it was best for her to go on with her life and pursue happiness. I didn't want her to be consumed with the ideal of being attached to me when I couldn't be attached to her, so to speak.
So Ben, when did you start to get a sense of hope? You were convicted in 87, the second time in 88. You went through the 90s.
You kind of cut out, but
I said, when you had a rough 90s, right? You and Deborah got divorced. Some of your friends, your best friend was paroled. Some of your friends were exonerated. When did you begin to get hope?
when did I always had hope. The word says, so then faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Uh, and so I always had hope. Although I didn't have possession of this freedom, this liberty that I longed for. I always had hope that God would eventually prevail in the matter, and that the truth would prevail. But one of the things that I guess kind of helped increase things was when I began to write Centurion Ministries in 1989. And although their words to me kind of took a little hope away from me, because they had admitted to me that they received thousands of requests a month from people professing their innocence. So the likeliness of them ever taking my case was very slim, but they encouraged me to continue writing any and every one I could. And they continued to correspond with me about my case. And so that gave me hope. And then in, I guess, 2000, when Jim came down to visit me and informed me that they were taking my case and that they wouldn't stop representing me until they walked me out, that gave me a lot of hope, because I knew that I had someone that was fighting for me now in trying to help present my innocence.
Allison, can I jump in and just give a little context?
Yeah, that's a great
Okay.
idea.
The judge that he got, so Jim McCluskey got all of this evidence, along with a lawyer, Cheryl Watley, to a judge in 2004. And the judge, they wanted the judge to hold an evidentiary hearing, which is basically a hearing for someone who's already been convicted, but there's new evidence. And so they can get that new evidence before a judge in an evidentiary hearing. And this judge, Judge Magnus, who's like, there are so many heroes in this story, and Judge Magnus is one of them. When I talked to him, What he told me is that he had just been elected judge in 2006. He won the election, and then he started in January of 2007. And one of the first people he met were people representing Ben, who said, we want you to take care of this case. And he said, what case? And they pointed to a big box in his office that had been left by his predecessor. They said, that case. And so Judge Rick Magnus took the box, shut down his courtroom for an entire week. This never happens, just so he could master the material. Went down to the crime scene, tried to see, could the witnesses have seen what they said they saw? Just looked at the testimony of the jailhouse informant, Danny Edwards, and all of that, and finally decided, yeah, you know what? This happened in a time where a lot of black men were just convicted. Any black man will do. If he didn't do this crime, he did another one. So let's just get him off the streets. That was the attitude back then in Dallas. And so he took the case, and Ben, do you remember anything about, what do you remember about the evidentiary hearing? Maybe Michael Hubbard, I don't know. What do you remember?
No, pretty much all of it. How they put both Gladys Oliver and Jimmy Cotton on the stand and began to ask questions. And Judge Rick Magnus, he was real proactive in that he was engaged in the hearing as well. You know, he would stop the attorneys on occasion and ask questions himself. So that was very fortuitous of him to do that. And he was, I guess, more instrumental in getting information out than what the attorneys was, because a lot of times when a defense attorney is asking a state's attorney a question, you know, they're kind of apprehensive about answering questions. And so the judge was very instrumental in helping to, I guess, gather the information that we were trying to get out. For instance, Jimmy Cotton, he was saying that he was looking out of this kitchen window into the alley, which was dark outside. And he kept saying, he saw me. And then Judge Magnus asked him this question about, okay, you say you saw a being. And he was like, yeah, I saw a being. He said, well, you know, do you understand that people have gone out there and they've measured the distance you was from this car? And it was a moonless night, so it was dark. There's no street lights that would have provided lights. And you're saying you saw Ben Spencer. He was like, yeah, I saw Ben Spencer. So I remember him kind of asking the bailiff to go open the doors, the two doors to the courtroom. And he asked Jimmy Cotton to look out the doors that the bailiff had just opened. He said, I want you to look out those doors. You're going to see two other double doors down that corridor there. He said, you see those doors? And he was like, he just shook his head like, yes. And he was like, I want you to understand that those doors aren't quite as far as you was from this car this night that you claim you saw pulling this out. And you say you saw Ben Spencer get out of the car. And he was like, well, I didn't see him right then. I saw him later on getting his car, and I just assumed it was him. So that was the beginning of him, I guess, breaking the ice with Jimmy Cotton, to him coming forward with acknowledging that he really lied about what he saw.
He also had, they also had a forensic expert to show that people could not have, on a dark night like that, they could not have identified someone from like 89 feet away, a football field away, 123 feet away, which is what the three witnesses were. They couldn't possibly have identified someone who was running away on that dark night. And so there was a forensic expert, but there was also Michael Hubbard. And, you know, we don't know if Michael Hubbard did it, but what we do know is that he confessed to doing it to two of his friends, and and the friends told the police about it. We also know that Michael Hubbard went to prison and got out of prison and attacked 10 other people with the exact same MO, waiting outside at night on a weekend or on a night. waiting for an executive to come out of his office, hitting him over the head with a bat. He was known as the Batman. This all happened a few years after this. It was the same MO. And people he had confessed to 2 people that he did it. And so what Judge Magnus did is he had Michael Hubbard come in, who was in prison for being the Batman. And Michael Hubbard claimed the 5th, right?
Right. Michael Hubbard pleaded the 5th throughout. No matter what question was asked of Michael Hubbard, he pleaded the 5th. But I want to go back and interject this, if I may. You brought up that Cheryl filed a writ of habeas corpus in 2004. At the time that she filed the writ, there was a judge in office on that bench in the 283rd District Court. I believe his name was Cunningham. And he pretty much sat on the case and then decided to resign his bench so he could run for district attorney. And there was a judge that was appointed, I can't think of her name right now, and she kind of sat on it for another 1.5 years or longer until Judge Rick Magnus was voted in to sit on the bench in the 283rd District Court. And I just want to bring that up because, you talk about faith and hope, I tend to believe that things happen at the right time for the right reasons. And when the case was filed in 2004, it wasn't the right time, nor the right judge there, as well as the judge that was appointed. It wasn't the right time for her to do anything with the case. So the appointed time was when Judge Rick Magnus took office and sat over the hearing, because had any of these other judges been the judge, and maybe we wouldn't have had the success that we had. So I just tend to believe that things happen.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. So you came up for parole in 2007, 20 years after the first trial, 20 years after your arrest. And you wrote you wrote Deborah, who she was your ex-wife at the time, but she's also what you wrote.
You're going in and out, but I caught bits and pieces of what you said. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Let's see. Can you hear me now, Ben?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's like a telephone ad. You were up for parole in 2007, and you wrote Deborah about your chances of parole. Can you tell us what you said to her and why?
Well, I understood the parole system. And so I had wrote Deborah a letter explaining to her that, I didn't really think it would have been nice to make parole, but I didn't really think I would, which I did not. And fortunately for myself, when I came up parole in March 2007, after doing 20 years flat, like I said, I didn't really think my chances were that good, because for one thing is that the Texas Parole Board, they expect you to accept responsibility for your actions. And being that I didn't commit to accept responsibility for it, nor have remorse. And those are two of the things that they at least require in order to make parole, is that you have to have remorse and admit culpability for it. And those are two things I couldn't have or do.
You wrote to Deborah, I've memorized it, you wrote, the truth is more important to me than my freedom.
Right. And that's the statement, because for years, even after 2007, I'm turning to TDC after the evidentiary hearing, other inmates would always tell me, man, just go in there and tell them what they want to hear. say that's something I can't do. I can't go in there and lie and say I committed a crime that I didn't commit. I can't have remorse for a crime that I didn't commit. You know, I say I sympathize with the family and their loss, but I can't have sympathy for something that I did not do.
Alice Oliver and Jimmy Cotton, like eyewitnesses who lied. Are you angry or bitter towards them?
Not at all. I mean, people do strange things. I don't understand the purpose, reasoning behind the lies, and for them to continue to hold on to the lie for all those years. But one of the things I tell people is since the day of my arrest, even before I knew who my accusers were, I prayed for them. And even after I learned of who they were, I prayed for them. I prayed that they would, that God would protect them and even guide their hearts in coming forward and telling the truth, which I truly believe that God placed on their hearts to tell the truth. However, in every matter, we have control over our own actions, our own lives. God is not going to force us to do anything that we don't want to do. Of course, his Holy Spirit, I believe, directs us, gives us thoughts, and gives us guidance and direction. However, whether we accept it and follow that direction or not is completely up to us. And I believe that they chose to ignore God's Spirit, Holy Spirit prompting them to do the right thing all those years.
Could I, when do we want to stop for a question? Will there be question and answer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll just briefly, and give me a pass for a second while I just tell a little bit of a story, which I think you've heard a million times. So I got involved in the reporting of this in 2017. And here's the shocking thing. It was 30 years after the crime. The shocking thing is you can find a lot of evidence, new evidence, 30 years after the crime. And so I went down there and joined up with a private detective named Daryl. Daryl Parker, excuse me. Joined up with Daryl Parker, a former Marine, really great guy, who was doing this pro bono, felt that Ben was innocent. And the two of us went, in the summer of 2017, went all over the scariest parts of Dallas. I'm pro-gun control, but I was pretty grateful that he had a gun with him when we would go up to these really scary places, these doors. And there was one time I remember we had been looking for Jimmy Cotton. And Jimmy Cotton was one of the men who testified against Ben, as you heard. And by this point, Jimmy was 48 years old. He had been 18 at the time of the crime. And we had gone several places to find Jimmy. But finally, Daryl came and said, Barb, I think I've found Jimmy. Let's go to his mother's house or apartment. So we go to the mother's apartment. It's pouring rain. It's like a Motel 6, so there's like a balcony over us and sheets of rain coming down behind us. And we're standing there, and I'm standing in front of the door, and Daryl's kind of to my left. And he goes like this. And he's about to knock, and he looks over at me. And I look over at him, and he very quietly takes me by the shoulders and moves me about 2 feet to the right, so I'm no longer standing in front of the door. And he whispers, sometimes they shoot through the door. So he knocks, and the door opens, and we go in there, and I'd planned the interview very, very carefully. I didn't want to spook him, but I had a microphone, and that's intimidating. I was doing it for NPR as well as The Atlantic. And I thought, okay, we'll just ease into this. And I asked him kind of one question, like, we just kind of want to talk to you. And he blurts out, I'm not saying it was Ben. Could have been him, maybe it wasn't. And it just became a confessional after that. How the police had given him Ben's name. How the guy was tall, he never saw his face, he was running away, he thought maybe it could be Ben. The police had suggested it was Ben, and all of this just came pouring out of him. And he agreed both to take sign an affidavit and also take a polygraph, which he passed with flying colors, talking about how Gladys Oliver had persuaded him and the other young man, Charles Stewart, to agree with her. Just stick with the story, she kept saying to him, so that they could get something we haven't mentioned, a $25,000 reward. The reason there was a $25,000 reward was that the victim, Jeffrey Young, was the son of one of Ross Perot's top executives. Now think of that, 1987, Dallas, Ross Perot, self-made billionaire, about to run for president, not once but twice, the biggest man in Texas. Ross Perot wanted this case solved, so he offered a $25,000 reward, and people who initially said they didn't see anything suddenly saw something. Gladys Oliver, Jimmy Cotton, Charles Stewart, they all saw something suddenly after this reward was announced. And so Jimmy Cotton agreed to take an affidavit and recanted his story. Charles Stewart was dead. Gladys Oliver wouldn't talk to us. But that was the beginning for me of seeing, I knew Ben, in my heart I knew Ben was innocent, but as we got more and more evidence, a new alibi witness, the jailhouse snitch recanted on tape, as we got all this evidence, it became so clear that Ben hadn't gotten a fair trial and that he was innocent. But we left out one other thing. In 2008, Judge Magnus ruled that Ben was innocent. But the Court of Criminal Appeals, a judge can't just release someone. It has to go up to the High Court in Texas, the Court of Criminal Appeals. And the High Court looked at it, sat on the case for 3 years, looked at it and said, yeah, no, there's no DNA in this case. So we don't really think you're innocent, Ben. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And that was in 2011. And so now here we were, 2017, digging up new evidence.
And then what happened? So he was released in 2021. So what, from 2017 when you joined it until 2021?
So from the outside, I'll tell from the outside, and then you can tell from the inside. From the outside, what happened is Cheryl and I brought this information to Jim McCluskey and Cheryl Watley, and then there was a new attorney too, Carrie Udishin. And the thing that changed, my article ran, the NPR story ran, nothing happened. Because a news article has no weight in a court of law. Nothing happened. But then something did happen, and that was in 2018, a new district attorney was elected, John Creuzot. He was a black man, grew up poor, had seen a lot of wrongful convictions, had served as a judge, and now he was DA. And so Cheryl and Jim and Gary, Ben's team, took this information to DA Creuzot, and DA Creuzot handed it all over to this woman named Cynthia Garza, who was the head of the Conviction Integrity Unit, which was a unit within the prosecutor's office that would reinvestigate questionable convictions. Cynthia, whenever I think of Cynthia, I think of the soundtrack to Jaws. She's really sweet, she's really nice, but it's like if you get in her line of sight, it's do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. She took our information and she found so much more information, including, what did she find about Gladys Oliver?
Well, that she had received that they knew that she wanted the reward money, which she denied initially, as well as that she had received money from Ross Perot.
Else. They had it all along, and Cynthia Garza, who had access to the prosecutor files, was able to dig that up. So after a while, they came up with the defense worked with the DA. They decided not to argue that he didn't get a fair trial. which is a lower bar. A judge agreed, and then it went back up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. But tell what happened. Can you describe March 12th, 2021?
March 12th, 2021. Yes, that's the day I was released. It was a Friday. Wasn't expecting to be released right then. In fact, the judge had said she wouldn't have a hearing until the following week, and for some reason she moved it up to that Friday, and so it was just like a whirlwind that took place, and she released me on a PR bond, a personal recognizance bond, forthwith, and pending the Court of Criminal Appeals ruling on their recommendations of me not receiving a fair trial. And I was released around about 3 o'clock, 3:30 that Friday evening. You know, a lot of people asked me what was the experience like. To me, it was like waking up out of a coma, like I woke up out of a bad dream. Even now, I have to recall being incarcerated for the 34 years I was gone. It was like it just disappeared. It just, you know, God walked me out of jail into my freedom and into my life, and I've just been enjoying it since.
And so then you were released in 2021, but it was a few more years until you were exonerated. Can you talk about that? What was that like for you at the exoneration hearing?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, just to finally from the charges that had held me captive for 34 years, and to have not just the DA apologize to me, but have the judge as well apologize and tell me how sorry they were for what I had gone through for the 34 years of my incarceration. I mean, it was just ecstatic. I was so happy, and I mean, very blessed. You know, God always prevails, and you know, it was just a blessing to experience it.
Can you tell us how you used your time, what you said during the, can I just set the scene a little bit for the evidentiary hearing? So the evidentiary hearing the exoneration hearing started August 29th, 2024 at 10:30 in the morning in the same room that Ben was convicted twice, right? Courtroom 283. And before the hearing, probably, I don't know, 150, 200 people were waiting outside, mainly from his church, not just from his church, his family members, his friends, you know, all these people waiting outside. And when they open the doors, everyone rushes in, and it's standing room only. I mean, this courtroom officially holds 80 people, and there are about 150 in there. And so they're just standing, we're just squeezed together. And the judge finally says, look, some of you guys, I mean, this is a fire hazard, you gotta go outside. And so they were able to kind of watch on the YouTube channel or whatever. And so everyone's in there. And Cynthia Garza breaks down, the prosecutor breaks down and says how sorry she is, Ben, on behalf of Texas, and is crying. And then the judge gets down there and says, I'm going to come down and stand in front of you, Judge, Ben, because I want to be the first to shake your hand as a fully exonerated innocent man. But Ben, before that, in between those two things happened, Ben stood up and was given some time to say a few things. Can you just talk about what you said and why?
Yeah, I just didn't want the family of Jeffrey Young to be forgotten, because not only were we victims of my wrongful conviction and incarceration, but they were victims as well, because they had been deceived for all these years to believe that I was responsible for their father's husband and as well as son's death. And so I just didn't want them to be forgotten, and still I don't want them to be forgotten, because the person responsible for the crime that was committed against Jeffrey Young has still not been acknowledged, nor has he been brought to justice for his crime.
Open up for audience questions.
Yeah.
Do you have questions for Barb or Ben? Talk into the microphone.
Hi, Ben. Sorry.
Hello.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and also, I forgot the name of the journalist, Deborah. Right? Barbara, thank you so much for being an incredible journalist and ally in this whole situation. Ben, I was just curious, and has to do with my ignorance with prison, but while you were there, I know that you said that you were in solitary, but 30 years is also a really long time. Did they have you do any like labor or like, I know that you were able to get your education there, but I was just curious if they had you like making things or working outside of the prison.
Yeah. Well, the solitary confinement was while I was incarcerated in the county jail, which was prior and previous to me being sent to Texas Department of Criminal Justice. But throughout my stay at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institution Division, yes, I worked, my first job, I worked in what's known as metal fab, where we where we made stuff like bars, bunks, tables, all this stuff was made out of iron. From there, I was SSI, which was pretty much a janitor. I cut hair for the longest period of my time incarcerated, as well as worked as a clerk for the last maybe 11, 12 years of my incarceration. I worked as a clerk in the education department. Uh, Pretty much I believe God has his hand on me because I was shown a lot of favoritism in prison. Not that I deserved it, but for some reason, people saw me differently than they saw most people who were in prison. You know, they believed in me. I would always profess my innocence throughout my stay in prison. So people, uh, they respected me as an individual. You know, not always just as an inmate, but as a person and as an individual.
Hi, hello to both of you. I want to commend you for like the peace and serenity that you've come at this with, and to say that, you know, like to have so much taken from you over the course of your life and to still be like giving back and like giving to the community, like that's really admirable. So thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to ask, like, how did you start to rebuild your life once you were outside, and like what tools did you use to like create the life that you have now as a free man?
Well, I always kept a positive attitude about myself. And in 2008, I met a young lady by the name of, her name was Christina Hall, or Christina Independence Hall. And her dad is also a billionaire. His name is Craig Hall. And she began to tell him about my case, and he took an interest in it and would write letters to the parole board, as well as a letter to the parole board of pardoning parole, saying that he believed in my innocence and I should be pardoned. However, none of that mattered to the Board of Pardon and Parole. I was never pardoned, nor was I ever paroled. But he began to offer me a job in 2012, told me that I had a job once I got out. And so once I was released in March 2021, I went to work for him at Hall Arts Group as a facilities engineer. So pretty much, you know, my life has been good. I've been working since, still working now at the same place, and enjoy doing what I'm doing. God has blessed me every day.
Barb, so much for being here and sharing this gut-wrenching story with us. I think that maybe the thing you can't hear, Ben, is just the size in the audience about the tragedies that you've dealt with in your life. It would be great to hear from you in terms of how you wish people could have supported you when you were in prison, or support, you know, people who have come out of prison and are making that transition. And then for Barb, the larger systemic issues. Specifically in Houston, it seems like they're really working on making some differences in the way that they run their government. Love to hear more about the systemic part of it.
So Guess what state is more progressive than any other state in terms of putting in guardrails so that people aren't wrongly convicted now, or giving prisoners access to the courts if they believe they are wrongfully convicted. Guess which state? Texas. Not every state can be as progressive as Texas, it turns out. But yes, I think Texas has come a long way because, for a couple of reasons, I think. One is they still execute people, so they want to, and it appears they may have executed someone, who's a guy who was executed for arson in 2001. It appears that they may have.
Willingham.
Yes, yeah, Willingham. So at any rate, they execute people. They want to make sure they don't get it wrong. And so they've done a number of things. Like, you can't put a jailhouse snitch informant on without confirming his testimony. I think it's hard to put him in a death penalty case, use a jailhouse informant. Eyewitnesses, they really check out their story. They record all of the interrogations, and so police can't manipulate or coerce. It's harder to manipulate or coerce interrogations and get false confessions. Prosecutors have to turn over all their evidence, not just ones they think are evidence they think might be relevant, but all of their evidence to the defense, so the defense can see everything that they have. So there are all of these reforms that have gone in Texas. Also, they make it much easier for a person who says he's wrongly convicted to get access to the courts. For example, for bad forensics evidence, like, you know what, you convicted me based on fingerprint evidence or ballistic evidence or hair evidence or something like that. That evidence has been discredited, not fingerprint, but the other stuff. So I need to get back into trial. So they allow people to get back into the courts much more easily. Other states are beginning to follow that. They also did one other thing which is making a huge difference. Dallas was the first place to have that conviction integrity unit. The one that Cynthia Garza, the JAWS person, they were the first one to incorporate that, to put that in their office. Now they're all over the country, and now more people are exonerated because of the conviction integrity unit than any other reason. So there is progress. The problem is that people are human. They get tunnel vision. They want to get this dangerous criminal off the road, off the streets, even if all the evidence doesn't add up. I mean, there are things, people are human, and witnesses lie, and prosecutors don't give over all the evidence, and police get tunnel vision. Like, all that still exists. And so there is a long way to go, but I just think, and I'm going to stop here, I just think that hearing Ben's story, not only the story of injustice, but also the story of faith, and hearing about how the faith of people who tried to get him out, Jim McCluskey, me, a few others, Deborah, Ben's wife, how that overcame the criminal justice system in Dallas, in Texas. I mean, I think that should be an inspiration, and what I'm hoping is that people will hear Ben's story and see him and go, wait a minute, we convicted that guy? That's the guy we convicted of murder? That's what I want them to say, and I want them to think hard about our system.
And I would like to say that what happened to me could happen to anybody. I mean, so we have to be mindful of that in safeguarding the systems that are in place and making them better, so that the wrong person doesn't get arrested, first of all, and especially doesn't get convicted of a crime that they didn't commit.
Sorry, can I jump in right quick? On a personal and emotional level, Ben, when you were first released, what was the first thing you did as a free person, or the one thing you couldn't wait to do? And Barb, when you heard the news, how did that make you feel emotionally, because you were such a big part of this as well?
Ben?
First thing we did, we just kind of came home. I came home that night and to a house full of people, some that I didn't know. I mean, Barb had a team here because no one expected me to get out and be released the day that I was released. So it was everything just kind of came together, and everybody was very interested in knowing the story. I mean, Daryl. I mean, we had a house full of people when I got home, so we just kind of entertained people and talked about the case. I think Barb was here, but it was ecstatic.
Actually, and left in 2014. But I'll tell you one thing that happened. Covering Ben's case actually kind of changed my own faith. I mean, I'd always been really serious Christian, but it was discouraging, to tell you the truth, watching Christianity and politics get so intertwined, and it was very discouraging, especially after I left, how everyone got polarized. And it frankly made me embarrassed to be a Christian. And when I began working on Ben's case, I thought about Jim McCluskey, and I thought about how he was single-minded in doing what the Old Testament tells us to do, to help people who are not in the position to help themselves, to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit the prisoner. What Micah said was, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with your God? And I began to realize that what I wanted was a stripped down faith that was devoid of any politics, that just focused on what I knew would please God. And for me, Ben gave me the opportunity to take all my passions and all my experience as a reporter for so many years, an investigative reporter, and to put it to something meaningful, something that I knew that would please God. And so doing this story and seeing this outcome and getting to know Ben and Deb, they are remarkable people. They're people, I should say that Ben, close your ears so you don't get a big head. I've never met someone who's been through the fire and ended up without the smell of smoke on him. You know what I mean? That he was thrown into the fire, and it made him stronger, more compassionate, more understanding, closer to God. I've never met anyone like him. And so, yeah.
Thanks.
Ben, I'm like, Ben, how is it that you can't possibly be mad at these people? Like, I was pretty mad at one of the judges. And he's like, Barb, it's really hard to be mad at someone when you pray for them.
That's a true statement. But the reality is, God has called us to a life of love, and if we can't show nor exhibit love, then are we truly Christians? Are we truly the people we profess to be? That's just the reality of it.
A couple more questions here.
One more.
One more.
Gosh, the pressure. I have the last question. Thank you, Barbara and Ben. Thank you so much for sharing this story. My question may be a little silly. Is there a happy ending for you and Deb? I see her name is up on your picture, so it seems like Deborah stuck around through all of this and sounds like she's a remarkable woman as well. So just curious the story there.
She is. We married January the 10th, 1987. We're married 2 months prior to me being arrested and accused of this crime. I was released March 12th, 2021, and on January the 10th, 2022, we remarried, and we're still married today. and we're just enjoying life together, getting to know each other all over again, and sharing our lives together. I mean, it's just, I believe that God, like I said, I believe God has called us to a life of love, and forgiveness. Sometimes people do things to us, they wrong us, and sometimes we hold resentment or harbor ill feelings toward them, but that's not what God would have us to do. He would have us to love in spite of all the wrongs that people do against us. We still should love them, treat them with respect and honor. You know, that was God. That is what God would want us to do.
That I've been missing. I apologize. Here we go. Oh, who was it? Oh, it's her. Can we do two more? Then that's on me. I'll take responsibility.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for sharing your story of your life. I see it as a testament to your perseverance, your resilience, your strength, your faith, and it's a story of forgiveness, which is what we talked about today in church. I agree with the last thing that the Barb had said about you came through it without any singes. It reminds me of Daniel and being thrown into the furnace and walking around because you had faith. And my question was more of a personal question. I wanted to know what your relationship was or is with your daughter, because you were expecting at the time that you were incarcerated.
Well, we have a son, and his name is Benjamin Spencer IV. We spent a lot of time together. In fact, he and I were together yesterday. We just enjoying life, and God is blessing me every day. Even when days don't seem too well, I'm blessed, and I thank God for it. Every day that I can wake up and take a breath, I see as a blessing. Despite what may come, I just truly believe that God is watching over us in spite of what we're going through.
Hey.
Thank you for your time. I really do want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Barbara, and the team that really put this incredible journey, an incredible display of love. The love that you all have shown prisoners and those who are incarcerated just blows my mind. It takes a lot of time and effort. Ben, truly, your story is truly remarkable. And the way you have handled this, I just can't even fathom what you go through. But I want to ask you, when you really take time to reflect on the journey, do you go through the battle of the mind with pain and anguish? And do you wish, as much as you want to be Jesus, only Jesus could? I now see the second Jesus, okay? Do you really feel like you can go to the temple and throw all those tables around those people that do that to you? And when it comes, how do you handle that? Truly. My final question, because there's so much to be said, is do you visit the prison or prisoners to talk to them and encourage them? Because I think you really have a ministry in that sphere of life. And finally, this is still going on today. Ben's story is not an isolation, okay? As a mother of 4 boys born in America that are an adult and a girl, and experienced some of this stuff, when my children are stopped by the police, they always call me immediately and say, Mom, stay on the phone. I said, what did you do? Nothing. He just stopped me. I went to a courtroom last year. My son, who just got married, who is a systems engineer with a government office, was stopped on the road and arrested with no charge. His young wife, they just married a few months, called me, Mom, right? I said, what? They said his case will be heard tomorrow. First thing in the morning, both of us were sitting holding hands tight. Brian showed up in his circuit TV like you are right now. We were trying to hear the charges or the charge. The judge turned around and said, Brian Obhana, we are sorry, you were wrongly arrested. You were wrongly arrested. We had died 1,000 times before, and he said, sorry, you go home. So this is still going on today. I'm just wondering, do you, I don't know what to say. God bless you all. Thank you.
I would like to say that, first of all, it's unfortunate that it happened. And the reality is that it does still happen today. Fortunately for your son, he was, although he shouldn't have never been arrested and accused of a crime that he didn't commit, the fortunate thing is that he didn't have to undo an unjust conviction, because that happens too often. And as Barb will point out, it's easy to get a conviction, and it takes moving the world to overturn it. I mean, it takes a lot. In my case, 34 years. But you know, you asked about turning over the table. I don't know if I could do that part. I mean, the Lord has placed such a love in my heart that I don't like to get upset. I don't like to argue. I don't like to fuss with anybody. Life is too good. Life is too precious to be inundated by all the negative things that we encounter in life that draw us into a darkness. I don't want to be in that place. I want to walk in the light as he is in the light, and to allow his spirit to guide and direct me into the right path. You know, I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but perfection is what I seek, and that's what I long for.
Thank you, Ben. We really appreciate everything.
Thank you.
We're so grateful for your time, and thank you, Barb. Very much appreciate it. So Barb and I are going to go to this table over here, and Barb will be available to sign books or talk to you. And Kate is going to come up and talk about action items we can take here in Maryland. Thank you again, Ben. We're so grateful.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all for having me.
Ben, I'm sure you're a busy man. You're welcome to stay and hear what we're doing for legislation in Maryland, but also if you need to log off, that's okay too. Thank you again for your character and for your witness today. We so appreciate it.
All right. Again, thank y'all for having me.
All right, so my name's Kate Thomas. I'll try to keep this short. I know we've been here for a long time, but I think when we hear gut-wrenching stories like this, it makes us want to do something about it, right? And there's a lot of injustice here specifically in Maryland. There's some details on your handout, some stats and things like that at the top about how we really struggle as a state. We are at the top in terms of the amount of African Americans that we incarcerate, more than any other state. So it's time for us to do something right at home about this issue. It's a race issue. And as we've seen today, the criminal justice system is not always just. So I'm a member of Cedar Ridge and also a co-leader of the criminal justice reform team. That team is dedicated to reforming the criminal justice systems, and it was birthed from other initiatives in the church that were fighting racism. So part of what we do is build partnerships. We can't do this work alone. It's part of being part of the community. And there are so many people out there fighting against issues in our criminal justice system. You just have to start getting involved, and you realize that there's a lot of people who really care about this issue. So on your handout, again, if you do one thing today, so okay, these are some stats. I feel like we've been here a while. I won't go through all of them. They're horrible. But specifically in Maryland, from 1995 to I think it was 2001, people who were sentenced to life in prison were not allowed to come up for parole. So we have a ton of people who were convicted of life in prison in their teens, specifically black men, who are stuck in prison. And there's some legislation right now called the Second Act that's on your page. Yep. If you do one thing today to make a difference, turn your phone on, go to that QR code, and fill out your name and address. At the bottom of that form is information. So if you want to read all that information before you sign your name to it, I would encourage you to do so, but it's additional information about that act. And pretty much it just allows people who've been in prison for more than 20 years to come up for parole. Now they have to go through all those different hoops and everything to say, I'm rehabilitated, this is why I'm going to make a difference. It's not just letting people out of jail or anything like that. But it's trying to undo some of that racist injustice that's been in our system for quite a long time, specifically in Maryland. So one thing, that's your thing, okay? If you want to do another thing, there are police accountability boards that were established in 2001, but they don't have any ability to like put out subpoenas and ask, like make requests of specific, they're meant to keep police accountable to anything that they're doing that is misconduct, but they don't have any power right now. And so there's some legislation right now that helps you, that helps those community boards where community people can get involved and keep police accountable. So that really relates to so much of, I think, what we heard today in terms of some of those injustices happening, like police and prosecutors concealing evidence and things like that. This is a direct law in our state that is being passed right now. So until March is the legislative season. That QR code takes you to more information. There was not like a pre-filled form, so you'll have to write your legislators about it, but it's a good thing to be aware of. And then the third one is just that if you want to do more, we have an ongoing group, this criminal justice reform team that helped organize this event today, that is constantly talking about these issues, learning about them, getting involved in different organizations. We were out advocating for the Second Look Act in Annapolis this week. So there's lots more, but we know everybody can only do so much. Again, thank you so much. Special thanks to Barb, Allison for organizing and leading today, for Ben for speaking, and to each of you for coming. So I'd encourage you to come get the book. The book is amazing. It weaves Ben's story intertwined with some of these racist issues, these systemic issues in our system. And it's really interesting. It reads like a novel, even though you're learning a lot as well. So I'd highly encourage you to go get a signed copy over there if you'd like. And then we also have a table if you want more information. We've got some printouts of different things. So yeah, thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it.